Welcome, listeners, to the Apps Main Stage APPSChats. This episode, we're talking about emo music, seeking to answer the questions, what is emo and what makes emo music emo? And hopefully that's broad enough for you guys. So I'm joined today, my name is Friday, Secretary of the Apps Main Stage Council, and here I'm joined by
Emily. I'm the Main Stage Chairperson.
And I'm Madeline. I am just in the club.
All right. Now, I want to pose this quote to you guys to see what you think. This is kind of around the start of emo. And I have the article pulled up. It says, in 1986, Ian MacKaye dismissed the term emo as the stupidest fucking thing I've ever heard. Now, Ian MacKaye is in bands like Minor Threat and Fugazi, which are really like punk bands, but around the time when punk started to reach an era called hardcore. And essentially, if you want to know the origin of emo, is that post-hardcore, or the genre kind of originating after hardcore, started to move towards very emotional music. Their bands would have these very emotional live sets. Mm-hmm. And so MacKaye, in response to hearing that post-hardcore had become emotional hardcore, he said, I must say emo-core must be the stupidest fucking thing I've ever heard in my life. But just in case you're wondering, I read in my Thrasher magazine the other day that, in fact, what my band was playing, along with what other bands in the city are playing, is emo-core, emotional hardcore, as if hardcore wasn't emotional to begin with. So, you know, the hardcore genre, he's saying, was essentially very emotional to begin with. And you could say that for, like, a lot of genres, is that music itself is very emotional.
Yeah.
And the fact that one genre is labeled emo or emo-core is stupid, you know?
Yeah, but there's a clear difference between emotional music of one genre and emo music.
Yeah. So altogether, the emo genre kind of originated in Washington, D.C., from post-hardcore bands, namely Rites of Spring and Embrace, if you guys have heard of those. Essentially, Rites of Spring is one of those very influential emo bands. But you listen to these, like, post-hardcore, emo-core bands, you'd think it was punk. That's the thing. That's kind of how the genre came about, is like rock led to punk, punk led to hardcore, hardcore led to emo. And the main difference between all of those and emo being that emo kind of really sought into the emotion with playing music. That's where screaming kind of really came into the scene. And from there, things just kind of snowballed. And I'd personally say emo is one of the most creative genres in terms of its evolvement and development.
Oh, yeah.
So, in terms of the 80s, a lot of those bands were very underground and not much recognition was made for the emo genre up until the 90s.
Yeah.
When things like Midwest emo came about. So have you guys heard of Midwest emo?
Yes, I love Midwest emo.
Okay.
I think I would just, when I'm trying to describe what it is to people, I'm kind of like, it's emo music, but it's typically softer than the 80s emo music. And why it's called Midwest emo is because it's basically made by miserable people, and it's kind of like made for people who live in the middle of nowhere. And so I feel like even just listening to Midwest emo guitar riffs, like you feel like you're like in high school, like in the middle of nowhere, like regardless of where you are. And I feel like that is what's most powerful about it, is that it's just like the music in and of itself, not even just the lyrics, like can invoke like such a extreme emotion.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about Midwest emo. Like you were saying, they call it Midwest emo because you think about like kids or teenagers in the Midwest who like nothing to do there, so they just kind of twiddle around, and this music they have just kind of gets into emotion of loneliness. But that's not what all Midwest emo bands are trying to capture at the time. Some that come to mind to me are American football. Like American football is just like real instrumental, twinkly music, but they didn't really market to to loneliness itself. They kind of marketed towards nostalgia. And, you know, like, you listen to something like Never Meant, that stuff kicks in, and you just, like, think back to the first time you heard that song. And everything else that starts flowing into your mind once the song goes on, that's something I really like. And on the flip side of Midwest emo, where it went a little crazier, was a band I like called Cap'n Jazz. And if you haven't heard of Cap'n Jazz, that's Cap'n Jazz is technically like a super group before their other notable bands are made. Like, they were members of American Football, Joan of Arc, and one more that I'm forgetting, but they all got their start in Cap'n Jazz. And people say that Cap'n Jazz was the real band that popularized and got emo started. And Cap'n Jazz really has that nostalgia factor, I would say. They got one song called Basil's Kite, where it's like a 20 measure, just guitar intro playing one chord on the same rhythm, and then it kicks in and you just feel it all come in, and you feel the emotion of the singer who's like, he's screaming, but his screaming is not good, but that's the idea.
Right. Yeah.
Is that's why it really hits you like that, is because, like, you could just do that thing, you could just go somewhere and scream over music and it would just make you feel so crazy. And as the 90s kind of developed and went on, there was still a huge element to post-hardcore in 90s, but a lot of the bands that were still playing post-hardcore did not get a whole lot of recognition. Unfortunately, like, probably my favorite emo band of all time is Sunny Day Real Estate. And you may not know Sunny Day Real Estate, but you definitely know Foo Fighters. And the Foo Fighters bassist Nate Mendel got his start playing in Sunny Day Real Estate with these absolute delicate bass riffs. But even then, the singer in the band, Jeremy, I can't pronounce his last name. It's like Enigk, and I don't want to mispronounce it. I'm just going to call him Jeremy. He had such a soulful voice, and he had simplistic lyrics. And I think that was the market of emo music around this time, is that there weren't that many lyrics in a lot of songs. It was like they stretched the words out over a lot of pitches in the melody, and the lyrics themselves weren't that specific to things. Unlike what I would say Midwest emo is like nowadays, it's like, I remember the first time that we met in the Dunkin' Donuts parking lot, stuff like that. Emo music of this time, it was simplistic so that you could generalize it to your own life. And to answer the question, what is emo, what makes emo emo, that's what defined it at the time, is that you can insert your own emotions into the song, but still feel the music itself. And in the late 90s, as this went on, some bands play with that a lot. Like, one you may know, Jimmy Eat World. Now, most people, if they think of Jimmy Eat World, they think of like pop punk when they got the one album in the early 2000s with the middle. Well, it was Bleed American. That's right. But you listen to some earlier Jimmy Eat World, and they have not so much like the pop-oriented vibe. It's still a whole lot of just like presence and stuff that some people don't really like in pop. And that's what defined, I would say, emo in like the late 90s. But do you guys have anything to say about the 90s? I don't know how much you know about that.
Well, going back to Midwest emo, kind of, this isn't really related to like the 90s scene specifically, but like if you guys listen to Midwest emo on like YouTube mixtapes, like they have like
those
I know what you're talking with the
about.
really long obscure names. Like the comment section is my favorite like corner of the internet, because it's like people literally pouring their hearts out and being like talking about like people that they were in love with when they were teenagers and now they're like in their 40s, or like when they like went to war. And so it's like, it's crazy to see how many people like have these strong emotions that were like evoked by Midwest emo music, when a lot of it is like instrumental or just like not even related to what they're talking about at all. And I just love how like that genre of music can bring together so many different types of people. So that's kind of my favorite thing about like Midwest emo music.
Yeah, I've listened to some of those mixtapes too. Those are pretty funny reading the comment sections, but those mixtapes play out so well because it's such a very generalized format for the genre, but you play around with it a lot. With the instrumentalism, and it kind of invokes a different emotion from emo before, I would say, but there's still a whole lot of presence of nostalgia and everything, so I don't have much else to say on this, so if we want to get rolling. Up next, we're going to be talking about the early to mid 2000s music, and this is something that a lot of us have a lot of passion for, so... Emily, you want to start us off?
Yeah, so kind of in the early 2000s, obviously I think when people think of emo music, they think of those bands. Like the emo trinity is referred to. It's My Chemical Romance, Panic at the Disco, and Fall Out Boy. And when you think about like the technical definition of emo, none of them really fit into it. Like maybe some early Fall Out Boy or some early My Chemical Romance kind of fit into it. But Panic at the Disco, which is my favorite band in the world, does not fit into the genre at all, but there's not really another way to refer to their early music because I think A Fever You Can't Sweat Out is just an entirely new genre in it, like on its own. So
especially considering like emo bands before, they didn't have like as much like not like techno, but like they like Panic had like synths and stuff, and
like
things like that really reinvented itself, but still calling its name emo.
Yeah, I think a lot of the reason why personally it was like called emo is because My Chemical Romance started to like create that evolution, and I feel like a lot of the reason why Panic and My Chemical Romance got put in the same box is because they were both very theatrical in like their performances and in their music. Like Fever and Pretty Odd are like two of my favorite albums, and like there are such like clear concepts and like visions, and their shows were like performances. They weren't just like somebody singing. So that's like one of my favorite parts about that subgenre of emo music, but I could talk about it forever. What are your thoughts on like the early 2000s?
Well, yeah, it's like that nostalgia like still is so relevant today, which is just crazy because like I can remember the first time like ever seeing a Panic at the Disco like music video. Like I was sitting in like my computer class in middle school, and you know, you're just scrolling through YouTube and there it is. And it's, you know, it's been part of my music career or like life forever now, and I like recommend it still to this day to people because it's just like the nostalgia is so strong. And I feel like everybody that like really went through that like emo phase in middle school really like still has a part of it in themselves, even though it's like not as strong, but it's interesting to hear people talk about it.
Yeah, I was definitely gonna say that. Like, I feel like that's why emo nights are so popular at like bars, and like there's like a whole emo night company and everything, because like once you're part of that lifestyle or like scene, like even if you don't dress or act emo anymore, like it still like sticks with you, because I feel like it just has such an ability to leave such a lasting impact on people. So I feel like the early 2000s is what like typically tends to stick with people the most, and like there's so much that went along with that, like the Hot Topic and like eyeliner and just like the way that you dressed and presented yourself. So even if you don't like act that way anymore, like the music and like the memories, I guess, like will always like stick with you.
I mean, Fall Out Boy literally has a song called "Thanks for the Memories."
Yeah.
That's their whole market, and they did it in like the text lingo.
Oh well, yeah, but it's because that's another thing. The song titles, they did it because like people were talking about how their song titles were way too long, and so they took out all the vowels for "Thanks for the Memories." But like, why was that a thing? Like, why were the song titles like 2 sentences long?
I mean, I always thought that was pretty charming. I'm sorry.
You know, you're good. No, I think it's great. Like, it's so fun to like. You would like play a song, and then people are like, what is this called? And then you just give them this like long title, and they're like, oh, okay, I'm not gonna remember that. You're like, it's fine. But it's like also just like, I think it was fun because then it really proved who was a fan and who wasn't. Because if you knew, like, the song and the title, you were, like, truly a fan, especially, like, with Panic at the Disco.
Oh my god, their early music, like, Lying is the most fun a girl can have without taking her clothes off. Like, what kind of title is that?
Right.
So, yeah.
I think that's one thing that defines emo listeners is that they will absolutely defend their genre. Like, even though Fall Out Boy, Panic at the Disco, like, real emos are like, or, well, not real emos, but, like, old school emo listeners are like, that's not real emo, but yet they, like, there are some bands around the time of Jimmy Eat World, like Saves the Day, that are dubbed as emo, but they were pretty much like pop punk.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, Fall Out Boy and My Chemical Romance, their early stuff, it's very punk and like pop punk, and then it slowly evolves over time just like that, because that's what everybody did. That's what Jimmy Eat World did, and like Sunny Day Real Estate, they were definitely emo in their earlier albums, but in their later ones they really played around with that sound, which kind of broke the sense of appeal that people had originally for emo. I found this quote, now that we're talking about it, from Chris Carrabba of Dashboard Confessional, who is most considered an emo artist.
Yeah.
I'd say I would, but...
he's, I feel like, one of the artists that, like, early 2000s people know about Dashboard Confessional, but he's also, like, they're recognized as an emo band by, like, the, like, quote-unquote real emo fans.
Yeah. So the quote I had from him, it says, "What does it take to be emo?" I was like, I'm the wrong guy to ask, but emo for me, the term, it never holds any negativity to me. We had respect. We did have respect as a scene. I just think that eyeliner period took the respect away. So a lot of emo artists that were in the 90s and 80s were really against the turn towards eyeliner. But then again, emo came from punk. And I feel like that, like, Fall Out Boy and MCR, like, you can call them pop punk, you can call them punk, you can call them emo, because that's exactly what they're doing. Like, their lyrics, I'd say, kind of fit the emo style. The music maybe not so much to, like, an average emo listener, but they kind of, they broke boundaries and they broke rules. They broke the rules of emo, and I know Fall Out Boy especially broke the rules of media. They so many songs about their publicity and everything.
Yeah. I mean, like, on Panic's first album, like, the first song besides the introduction, they're like, it's like Wet Dream for the web scene, like, they're basically like rejecting all forms of like paparazzi and everything before they even got to them, and they were like 17-year-old kids writing this. So it's
I think that was London Beckoned, songs about money machines, something like that.
That's the thing, is I can't connect the lyrics.
Right before that, in the pre-chorus, they're like, it's time for us to take a stand. They said that like 8 times.
And it's also crazy too, because on that first album, like, one of their main hooks was in like, the only difference between Matchdom and Suicide is press coverage, is like, swear to shake it up if you swear to listen. And like, they did. Like, literally every single album was different. And so I just find that crazy that that was one of like the first things they said. And like, I don't know if they intended to change every single album, but like, that kind of speaks for all of emo music, I feel like, because every era for like Fall Out Boy, My Chemical Romance, Panic, like, they're all so different. So anyway.
And I think moving on from there, when it was in the early 2000s, the term emo gained so much awareness and publicity thanks to those bands, but those bands still had like a market for staying in the limelight, like Fall Out Boy's hiatus return and how Panic is essentially playing pop music now, as those bands kind of turn towards the publicity, the whole emo genre as a whole just kind of significantly decreased in popularity, and we get bands kind of returning to some old formulas in early 2010. I know this is an era that I really like in music called Emo Revival. Some notable bands, I don't know if you've heard of these, Title Fight, Tiger's Jaw, Basement. Those are a lot that come to mind to me. And these bands all have different sounds, just like most other emo bands, but they kind of brought back that market of nostalgia. Like Tiger's Jaw, they play, and a lot of their songs are like in one key. It's the key of C, which is, it's a very bright, happy key. Even though the lyrics aren't necessarily happy stuff, you listen to that stuff and they got happy music going on. They're talking about all their struggles and stuff, and you can't help but listen to that and get like nostalgic. And on the flip side of that, Title Fight, my favorite band from the time period, actually had a return to the post-hardcore side of emo. A lot of their early music is like fast. They had that hardcore beat and screaming at everything, but once you like understand their taste and you like listen to the lyrics, that's absolute nostalgia. They have a song that I'm sure if you've heard of Title Fight, it's called Head in the Ceiling Fan, which returns to those simplistic lyrics that you generalize it a lot. Frankly, I don't even know what it's about. I just know what it means to me.
Right.
And that's the aim of emo music, I would say.
Yeah.
And I know you put on here some bands that were still considered emo, like Mom Jeans, Knuckle Puck, and State Champs. And around this time, a little after that, like people started calling that era of pop punk, which I would say, they're calling it sad boy pop punk. You remember that?
Yeah, it's a weird like middle ground because I feel like it's not like the pop punk that we traditionally think of, but it's also not like emo, but it's weird. I don't know. Yeah,
and bands that started to come after them, like Hot Mulligan. You listen to Hot Mulligan?
A little bit.
Yeah. I think their vocalist kind of fits that emo nostalgia factor, but that was the market of that whole time. Like bands that weren't emo but still had so much emotion to them, like The Story So Far.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I think it's Parker Cannon of The Story So Far. Nothing but screaming, the grit in his voice, and you just sink in to his exact emotions in the song. I'm like, but the opinions of like the people listening to emo music of this time period were like, they're like, oh, these are for male manipulators. And I thought that was a little generalized. I keep using that word, but what about Fall Out Boy's return during this period when they kind of tapped out of their past look? So
I know you really like Save Rock and Roll, which is their comeback album. Like, how do you feel about that?
It's obviously very different from it, but I like, again, with like, not to say like nostalgia again, but I remember just like Youngblood Chronicles.
Yes, oh my god.
I used to watch that so much, and so every time I like hear a song off that album or like anything, I just get hit with like nostalgia of like sitting there in my room like watching it like 6 or 7 times because it was just so good. And like it's just one of those, like, because there are like only a few albums I think that deserve like, they're like flawless, and I feel like for some reason that one just fits in for me because it's like they had the sound that was fun. They had all these like, you know, people on the tracks, and then they had like all the visuals, like to do like, because like it's such a big thing now. It's like for artists to do like movies with their albums, which is crazy because I like think of them doing it technically first, more or less. Like there were others, but that's what I think of like this Youngblood Chronicles being like that was technically a movie for their album, and it was just crazy how they like just decided to do it for really no reason. They didn't really have to, but
I think that was such an iconic return too, because like Pete Wentz was like, Fall Out Boy's not getting back together, and then like the next day they released Light 'Em Up, and that music video, they were like burning all this old Fall Out Boy stuff. It was like T-Pain with a blowtorch like throwing these like old Fall Out Boy records in a fire, and I think that's just like such an iconic thing to do. But yeah, I really do like Save Rock and Roll. And like they had Elton John on one of their songs.
Well, and like Courtney Love.
Yeah.
Like, that was crazy.
Yeah, it's insane. I think in my opinion that was their last like really good album. And then American Beauty, American Psycho, like, personally, I don't really love it. I mean, I think 4th of July is a cool song, especially, like, I have my own, like, theories about the meaning. But, like, American Beauty, American Psycho, and Mania are, like, they're different, and I feel like it's weird because they just don't feel like Fall Out Boy albums at all.
True.
And I definitely think that Save Rock and Roll was the last album that had like some hints of Fall Out Boy, but it's weird too because I feel like Patrick's voice has changed a lot since their beginning.
True.
Yeah, I mean, when I saw him in Atlanta, he was singing those old songs, but like
it didn't sound the same.
Well, yeah, he has this like inflection in the older songs. He makes like a more O shape with his voice, and you can listen to old videos and you think like that's Patrick Stump, but you listen to him now, he's got this real like our kind of like bitey sound.
I like the old one better, which I feel like is not an unpopular opinion. And he obviously has a great voice, like, regardless now. But it's interesting hearing him sing songs from Under the Cork Tree now. Because I'm like, this is so different. Like, I feel like you're not even the same singer at some points. But,
It's like 2 years ago I saw Panic at the Disco.
Oh, my God.
Don't love Brendan Urie anymore. But, to hear him sing, like, I Write Sins Not Tragedy, like, in the voice that he is now was so
like it.
weird.
Yeah.
And I was like, it didn't feel right.
Yeah.
But
Doesn't feel right because you listen to those music to that music because it's nostalgic, and you think back to that time, and now
they're so old now because he was like 17 when they recorded that, so his voice has changed so much. And
they've just reinvented their whole style.
Sorry.
I think, in fact, just the way emo has been reinvented this whole time, the only thing we're seeing nowadays that's like people would consider actually emo is Midwest emo nowadays, which is a lot more twinkly and it's a lot more math rocky, but like I was saying earlier, they drive home to some more specific things that might invoke old feelings, but it doesn't quite capture the same thing. So I want to ask you guys that, like, what does emo mean to you guys when you think about the whole progression of the genre?
That's a loaded question. I feel like kind of what you were saying, to me it means anything within like a subgenre of like pop punk, rock, kind of like anything kind of within rock music that evokes strong emotions and like, but it's also difficult because I think most music is supposed to have emotion in it, and but like you can have like Green Day has emotion in their songs, but no one's really arguing that they're an emo band. So it's like, where do you draw that line?
And like indie artists nowadays that people talk about, like Phoebe Bridgers, who's like real sad music, stuff like that. But you know, when I think about music that is like authentically emo, I just think about something like a song that's so simplistic to where you can insert yourself into the song, and therefore it's like the song kind of lights the fire, but you're bringing out your own emotion when you sing along to those lyrics. You sing along to Patrick and in like From Under the Cork Tree, or like when I think about Sunny Day Real Estate, it's all just like you tap into the song, and it's not about what they wrote it for, it's about what they're trying to invoke, compared to almost like any other genre.
Right, like you make your own meaning out of it, kind of, even if it was written about something very specific for that person. And I feel like Fall Out Boy's lyrics are a great example of that, because there are so many metaphors and like weird like symbols that like
one that comes to mind to me is 7 Minutes in Heaven.
I love that song.
Now that song is actually about drug use.
Oh really? I didn't even know that.
You did, exactly, because the songs are like a school dance, like the lyrics are like a school dance, and you think it's about like someone who's leaving you at a school dance and you're sitting on the wall, but no, it's about like you're by yourself and you're resisting the urge to use those drugs, and it's so powerful because it makes you think. It's simplistic lyrics, but it's got you thinking, and that's what I'd say emo is.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for joining us on this episode of APPSChats. Hopefully you kind of got an understanding of what emo is and what makes emo emo. Once again, I have been Friday.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Madeline.
and we will catch you guys next time.